Hi again, welcome to another Razorback screencast. In this episode we're going to continue looking at the armor plating, but I'm going to show you guys a few techniques about painting them. So let's get started. So I've hidden the motorcycle itself and we're going to focus on this UV mapped armor. So we have the test pattern on it from last time, and that's fine, but we now want to replace it with a new texture. So we can safely delete this texture tag. There's really no significant information held in it. It's just applied to the object with UV mapping. So we can always delete it and reapply it if we wanted to, and it would just get the exact same texture back. So what I'll do is I'll create a new material. This new material, it's probably wise to give it a name because our textures are going to be named in accordance with the name of the material. You'll see what I mean. So I'm going to name this armor-sides, and we can then simply apply it to the material. Like all texture tags in Cinema 4D, it's going to take UV mapping as its default, and that means that even though it just looks white right now, it is corresponding to the UV textures that we created in the last screencast. So Cinema 4D is really cool because it has all these built-in texturing tools. Let's take a look at one of them. We can actually go to the material, and under the texture menu we can say create new texture. This asks us for a base color. Let's go with a dark gray, and some other vitals. I'm going to use 2048 by 2048. That's actually a similar resolution to what our test pattern was. I think it's the same. And in my preferences, this is going to create a Photoshop format file, I believe. So we can just create a new texture in the color channel, hitting OK. Now this texture is now in RAM. It's accessible through this texture view here, and we can paint on it. If we go back to the 3D view, we see our changes. I'm just going to undo that. But as you can see, it's not quite real time. To do that, we need to right-click the material and say Load Textures, or enable 3D Paint. I think either option will actually complete the other task. So now that 3D painting is on, we could technically paint directly onto the surface of the object, and our changes that we apply here, as long as we're in a painting tool, are a little bit more real time. So I can apply a change right there and it shows up on our object, or I can paint directly on the object right here. So this by itself is pretty powerful, but it gets even cooler. So we know that when you have a material, you have different channels. For instance, we have a color channel, a specular channel, illumination. Illumination is more of an option in this case, but you have all of these channels available. So I have a texture loaded into my color channel right now. I'm actually going to turn off specular. It's going to get in our way. And I can turn on the reflection channel. So by default, this is going to make everything 100% reflective because it starts off as white. And if we were to render a region of our scene here, it's going to make our armor chrome. Now that's great if you're modeling like a Cylon motorcycle or something. But in this case, chrome is not what we want. We want a dark material with a few scratches. The scratches are what we want the reflection channel for, because under this material, we're envisioning some sort of metal. So completely reflective won't work for us, but partially reflective, I think, is the direction we'd like to go in. So to do that, we need to create a reflection map. So under texture, I can just say create new texture, just like I did for the color, and then I can use these exact settings to create my reflection map. Now theoretically, I could use a lower resolution reflection map And I probably want to start off with black as the color, pure black, because pure black is no reflection, pure white is 100% reflection. So if I say OK, we now have a reflection map. Now we can toy with the reflection map a little bit by going to the textures, making sure we're on the reflection map, and then painting. Now if we do some sort of back and forth scribbles right here, and then render this, it looks like it painted color as well. So let's undo. I wasn't actually prepared to do that yet, but let's dive into that since it's happening. If I switch to the body paint UV editing mode, it looks like part of my interface is actually not being shown, so perhaps I can use an empty palette down here to sort of resize stuff. Well, there's a little bit down here that you guys can't see. Let me see if I can clean that up. Okay, so I created a new group window which allows me to stretch this so that you guys can now see the extents of this layout. I probably will have to recreate that every time I switch layouts. So let's stay in this layout for now. This is the UV edit layout that comes with Cinema 4D, accessible right up there. Okay, so what we just saw accidentally is the multi-paint sort of mode. And if we go to the materials section here, we can see that there's a color channel, a reflection channel, and then there's this sort of multi-paint option. And I believe if I paint on the color channel and we switch to the reflection channel, we don't see anything. But if I enable color and reflection, I have to turn this on, and then you can see I can choose both pens. It's kind of difficult to see, but it is there. I can choose which channel I want to paint on, reflection or color, and then I can actually turn the pen on and off, which toggles whether I'm using that pen at the moment or not. And you can only do that when this option over here is turned on. So now that both are turned on, I have a light gray for color, and or it looks like white, and a darker gray for reflection. Here, I can make it sort of a more distinctly dark gray. We can now paint on another part of the model, like right here. And what we can see is that if we switch to the reflection, it's painted that exact thing on the reflection channel as well. And this is the feature we're going to want to use. So if I render a region, we may not be able to see it because I've used white. You can see the reflection a little bit there. But there's white paint here, but there's white paint with reflection here. So it's difficult to see because the environment is white right now. But this is the feature that I'm going to use here. So what we can do, turn off multi-brush painting right now, and I'm just going to undo until I'm certain that I have a fresh canvas for both of these channels. And for the color channel, I'm going to probably want to paint sort of a dark gray. For the reflection channel, I'm going to want to paint a similarly dark gray, but I don't want it too reflective, so it's going to be a little darker. So now we have that, and we probably want to choose a nice brush to work with. Now I do have my Wacom tablet with me. I'm just sort of switching over to that tool right now on my desk, and this will allow me to use some pressure sensitivity while we paint. So I should just be able to come down here to the let's see, if I switch to the paintbrush, I get my brush settings down here. You'll have to excuse me, I don't use body paint very often. I really like it as a tool though. So what I can do is I can look at the brushes that we have available to us right here, and some of them have this sort of a fine look already. So that's actually quite nice for a scratch. And what I'll do is I'll make sure that the pressure sensitivity is turned on. I typically like to put a bit of a curve on the pressure sensitivity like this, so that I need to actually put some force down on the pen in order to really make it go from 0 to 20 or so. So once I have pressure sensitivity on this brush, I can tweak the size a little bit, just make sure it's what I want. You know, this brush doesn't actually look like what I want. Let me try to find something different, something a little more suitable. This one here looks interesting. So it's a little too scattered. What about this brush here? It kind of has like a wet edges look. Oh, that works. Just a smaller size. Yeah, I think that looks good. Maybe 5 pixels. So we can now take this brush and we can actually start to paint scratches on with sort of these light brush strokes. And you can see I'm sort of just painting them on the sort of from an occluded angle like this, kind of in a manner that they might realistically occur as debris hits the bike or the lower parts of the bike are damaged by passing objects. And as I paint in the 3D viewport here, let me just zoom in on that, take a closer look. You can actually see this brush has a bit of a jitter in it, looks like. Well, that could just be because of the angle I was painting at. But we can actually see the corresponding brush strokes over here in the UV view. Now all of these scratches that I've been painting right here were not being painted on reflection because we didn't have that multi-brush setting on. So I'm just going to undo all of these scratches. Many undos. I'm not very quick with the Wacom stylus. And now I can turn on both channels and we can do some multi-painting. So what I like to do is sort of rough things out a little bit in the 3D viewport like this. So I sort of get a rough idea of where I want my scratches, and I'll do this for both sides of the armor. And while I'm doing that, I should be getting on both channels. So our reflection channel here has some scratches as well, which means if we were to do a render, we might be able to see some of those scratches coming through. Yep. And so let's go over to the other side here. And, you know, from a convincing sort of angle, just sort of rough some of these scratches in. You don't want to put too many because the effect loses its subtlety. And you can see that some of the scratches sort of land very occluded here. That's good. But you also get this natural idea that this edge here should be pretty beaten up. I can show you how to do that as well. So I'm going to go back to the color channel to view. And as we pan around here, we can see our scratches being laid down. And this gives us a really good idea of where we can go in and polish. So for instance, if we wanted to make some of these scratches a little more deliberate, we can do that. We have a really good guide as to where they should sort of start and end. I mean, this is the kind of work that a tablet is just perfect for. And of course, when I say tablet, I don't mean like an iPad. I mean like a graphics tablet, like a Wacom tablet, a Wacom tablet. Not sure what the preferred pronunciation is. So just create these scratches sort of as straight as we want. And the pressure sensitivity helps give each scratch a beginning and an end. We sort of get this beaten look on the front of the machine. So you can also put some scratches kind of close and parallel to each other, like that. And we can pan over to the other side, do something similar. I don't want to do too much painting in this video because this painting can take a while. It's probably not the best use of a tutorial to just sit here and watch me paint because I'm not really good at it. So I oftentimes have to do it over and sort of start from scratch. I've actually rehearsed this tutorial a couple times just because I knew that some of the body paint features and some of the techniques I'm using, they aren't everyday techniques that I use all the time, so I knew I'd be a little bit rusty. So this is actually the third time I'm trying this. I wasn't recording the other times, but I am this time, so let's move on. The protruding chunk of an edge right here could use some sort of impact weathering, as if the wind and desert dust and stones and all that stuff bang up against it pretty regularly. So what we can do for that is we can notice that we have this edge here. So if I were to zoom in a little bit more, and if we carefully paint just over this edge, and then we look at what that looks like in 3D, we can see how it maps. I'll even turn on edges. You can see it maps right over the edge. So that's actually a good spot to start putting sort of weather damage, sort of erosion. So zoomed in here on this edge, and just sort of start to add scratches, almost ensuring that the scratches cover the edge itself and maybe sort of streak away. So that gives you sort of an impact area right here. So you can even do a couple of blotches as if there's bits of material missing. It gives you a little bit of an impact zone at the front and sort of a trailing damage strip. So right here is probably where that sort of stuff might stop, because the armor starts to flare upwards. But you get the idea. Like I said, I don't want to focus too much on the details in this video because it's really more about the technique. So we have this idea of how the scratches should be and where they should be. So let's move on from purely scratches. I'm just going to zoom out a little bit. And we have some scratches on the armor. It looks better already. So the scratches are fine, but we can add like sort of some splotchy weathering. I'm just going to save. And it asks me if I want to save the textures. Now it means these textures I have over here in RAM that have not actually been saved yet. So I'm going to say yes. And if I save again, it saves the actual file, because when I saved, I had the textures selected. Okay, so we have these textures saved to disk now. We can go over here to the layers palette. Now, normally I would have created new layers before doing any painting. In this case, I didn't. I kind of forgot, but I'll show you the layering technique anyway. So I still have the multi-brush on where I'm painting on both. I'll leave that on. And I'll just create a new layer on the color channel, switch over to reflection, create a new layer there as well. Let's not create a new layer on reflection. Let's leave reflection alone for now. I'm going to turn off multi-brush and I'm just going to focus on color. So I have this layer, and I think this layer might be a good opportunity to just add some grunge and some shading so things don't look as uniform as they are right now. And there's two main kinds of sort of shading that I like to add. I like to add sort of a graduated shading, maybe from the bottom to the top, and then just sort of a random splotchiness to show a little bit of weathering and stuff like that. So again, under the preset brushes, I like to choose a nice interesting looking brush. There's lots of brushes here that give you some really cool textures. Let's just go with something simple like this right now. So we can, has a little bit of green in it, might be interesting. You can load your own texture here, you see. So if we just paint regularly, you can see it's pretty intense. But what we can do is we can actually change this layer mode, maybe to multiply, or screen wouldn't work. Overlay might give us something interesting. Darken, and you can always desaturate this brush if you wanted to. For now, let's do multiply. That way we get a little bit of texture and a little bit of darkening as well. Although it is looking like a pretty organic brush now that I look at it. Maybe there's something a little more suitable to our metal like this. So what we can do is use a really big brush like that and use a relatively low pressure. And we can also set the pen pressure to be progressive like we did before. And just sort of add a little bit of variation. So it's just subtle brush strokes at certain areas of the armor. You can see here I'm sort of focusing on this higher edge right here, and you can see it adds a really sort of subtle, real world, weathered kind of look. You can do this painting in 3D or in 2D, it doesn't matter. And as you sort of explore the surface of the model a little bit more, you can sort of figure out where you want these areas to appear. Now this layer went back to a normal layer because I undid, but if we switch it back to multiply mode, we can see I'm actually darkening it while adding this texture. So we're taking it back closer to sort of the black texture of the Razorback. And you can focus on patterns, so you can focus on the leading edge mainly of the armor. So to replicate that over here, you can focus on this leading edge, and this is one of those instances where having a pressure sensitive pen is really advantageous because I can just press a little harder if I want to exaggerate the dark. And as we circle around the model, you can see some of the areas on the other side are nice and dark in comparison. And you can just add a little dark corner there at the bottom just to add some variation. And what I meant by sort of a graduated variation layer is that, this layer, like we can call that a grunge layer if we want. I'm just gonna rename that grunge. And then we have another layer down here that we're not using at the moment, but we can call this a sort of a dirt layer. So the idea behind this layer is that these machines aren't going to be maintained very often. If they are maintained, they're not going to be cleaned. These aren't show vehicles, they're work vehicles. So what I was thinking is, like, down near the base of the vehicle here, there may be sort of a dark, like a bias towards darker textures. And then as you come up to the top, you might get lighter textures, just from all the grunge from the road and whatnot. So what we can do is paint on those areas, and just to show a little bit of technique, a little bit of one of the features. What we'll do is we'll select just the polygons we want to paint in order to restrict our selection so we don't paint too much on the inside. As you can see, as my brush goes here, it actually flips over to the inside textures. So the way you do that, if memory serves me correct, let's see. We can go to our UV polygons view using like our live selection tool. I think I need to turn on show UV mesh. I probably need to select the object. Oh, you know what? This is the regular polygon mode. I want UV polygons, which are right here. So this will allow me to select these polygons. So I want to select these polygons and these right here. and I can just press UW to expand the selection. Now that I have this selection, I believe I can go to select and I can say, let's see, I think I have keyboard shortcuts for this, but I'm not actually sure where they are in this layout. This layout changes the paint tools as well. Oh, here it is. So we can create a mask from selection. So that basically means that we get to create sort of like a marquee sort of Photoshop style selection from the polygons. So we can hit that and it creates that selection from what we have selected. So that'll help us restrict what we're painting. We can also grow this selection. So we can grow the selection. Let's try 15 pixels. Okay, a little bit more than that. So let's grow selection by 40 pixels. There we go. So we have like a nice border that we can paint in right now. And notice it isn't a large enough border that it's going to affect any of the other objects. Maybe 40 is too large. So let's try 30, which I think was the default. So now that we have this selection, if we go back to our paintbrush, we see the selection in the viewport. And as we orbit around our object, we can see it won't really let us paint here where stuff isn't selected. I'm actually clicking and dragging right now. But it will let us paint here on this other part. So you can see it's only allowing us to paint in the selected area. Really cool feature. So now that we have that set up, what we can do is we just saw me paint a little bit with this brush and it comes out kind of light. So what we can do is change that to a multiply layer so the brush effect is a little bit darker. And we can just sort of start to paint along the base here. Go up about halfway and go back down. And then start at the base again, kind of make it nice and dark. And we can sort of just paint this grungy effect going up the side of the vehicle. Now the coolest part about this is that I'm painting in the viewport relative to what I'm seeing. And Cinema 4D is doing all the math. Notice some of the paint is showing up down here at an angle, it's showing up here at a different angle. It's, you know, I don't use the feature very often, but man, it's really convenient. I can even bring some around the front here just to darken this area because the front wheel is no doubt going to kick up some material onto this part of the armor. So that looks pretty good. And over on this side of the machine now, and again, you know, if we wanted to be really sure we didn't get any paint onto the other side of the armor, we can deselect those parts and select just the armor on this side of the machine and sort of restrict that. And you can bring the sort of dirt layer up a little bit. Maybe add a little bit of random dirt on top here. Maybe go from the top view, paint a little bit of dirt as if it layered on top of these parts. And if we go to the select menu and deselect, it deselects, and you can see that we're just, you know, only painting within that area. So that's a really useful tool. So I'm going to save again. Asks me if I want to save the textures. Yes, I do. And I'll go back to my screencast view, which has sort of a padded part down here at the bottom already. And I can right click my material again, say unload textures, which sort of flattens everything back to a regular Cinema 4D texture map without any fancy body paint shading on it. And I'm gonna put my pen away, get my mouse back. And what we can do, I believe, is we can select this material, go to the editor tab, and we can actually choose a larger texture preview size, 2048 by 2048. And this looks like pure black. I'm not sure what's going on there. Let's see what happens if I render. Maybe Cinema 4D just isn't drawing the texture properly in the viewport. You know what's happening? It's still using an old version of the texture. Notice that there's no grunge on it. So what you need to do sometimes is you can just right click here and you can say render materials. That'll reload the textures. Or you can go to each channel right here and one by one just kind of say reload image. Let's try render. So if I say render material, you see it reloads our newly painted texture. So that's a good tip. So this is what our armor plating sort of looks like now, which looks a little bit more weathered. I'm probably going to do some work on this off camera just to get it to look exactly how I want. And when we render, we can actually see in the global illumination pass, the reflective bits come out shiny in the pre-pass. You can see the scratches. So that's how we know that they're reflective, even though pretty much everything they're reflecting right now is white. And you can see here that the armor looks a lot less plasticky. It has more depth, it has more texture, it has a nice sort of shaded look. And we can give this treatment to so many components of this machine. We can do it to the robotic arms. We can give that a similar treatment to these brackets right here. Those could deal with some nice texturing that just sort of gives them some age. Another thing I like to do is you actually add a little bit of texturing around the bolts, like a little darkening, because grit and grime likes to accumulate right around the bolts on a machine like this. So that was a nice little exploration into texturing in Body Paint 3D. You know, we got to see how some of those tools work, the multi-brush tool, layers, and just sort of taking some simple brushes and brush strokes and layering them to make a normally plain and uninspiring area look a little bit more textured and interesting. So I know this was a bit of a long screencast, but I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, see ya.